Good evening. Thank you for your patience this evening. With the time change and with all that's going on in the market, traffic was a little bananas. We wanted to give a few extra minutes just to make sure that everyone made it in here. So I'm glad you made it here. But good evening. My name is Shelley Woodruff. I am one of the pastors here at First Baptist Church of Decatur. I've seen many of you already at other Conversations events that we've hosted here at the church, and some of you are new faces. And I just want to take a few moments before we begin the important conversation that's about to take place here on the stage, but I just want to say thank you and to welcome you to this space. Our church values conversations like these. We value having thinkers and writers and poets here that challenge us, that convict us, that change us even just a little bit, so that when we walk away from this space, we have potentially been made uncomfortable. We have been inspired to think about something in a new way, and then hopefully too, we have been put in dialogue with each other to just increase our sense of community here in Decatur. And so as a church, we're committed to bringing these events to our community because it's something that we value. And your presence here this evening to be part of this conversation is something that we don't take for granted, and we do appreciate. So thank you for being here on behalf of our church. We want you to feel home and welcomed. We do have restrooms out on these way out on the hallway. We also have them in the back down the stairs. We are going to turn it over to our book partner, our bookseller for this evening. It's Charis Books. We're going to turn that over to them in just a second. It's a gift to be able to partner with the local bookstores here that we have in Decatur. We have so many fabulous ones, and these independent local bookstores really are the backbone of our community. They are the ones who help good ideas thrive and live in places. And so we're so grateful to work with Charis Books. They are selling books both by Tracy and by Jericho out in the back. We encourage you to get them because our authors are going to be signing them at the end. You don't want to miss that opportunity. But without further ado, I want to invite ER to the stage, our partner from Charis Books.
Thank you, Pastor. We are so honored to be here once again at the First Baptist Church of Decatur with our friends from the Georgia Center for the Book. I love being here because it always challenges all my ideas about what a church can be in the best ways. I do believe that in the best case, a church is a place for a conversation and is a place for growth. Thank you to all of our volunteers from the First Baptist Church, all of our folks working from Charis. We really appreciate you. And we appreciate all of y'all coming out tonight. I know the time change, it starts, dampening our spirits. So it warms my heart to see y'all here tonight, to be enlivened by this conversation. When the world is so heavy as it is right now, I look to the poets to give me wisdom. I think poets offer secular and sacred texts for us to help find our way in the world. And there are no two greater voices than the two folks we have here tonight to help us think about wayfinding in hard and sorrowful times, and wayfinding with joy and complexity and beauty. So it's my great honor to first introduce our interviewer tonight, Jericho Brown. I'm sure many of y'all know Jericho. He's the author of The Tradition, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. He is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and the National Endowment for the Arts. He is the winner of the Whitting Award. Brown's first book, Plea, won the American Book Award. His second book, The New Testament, won the Ansfield Wolf Book Award. His third collection, The Tradition, won the Patterson Poetry Prize and was a finalist for the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. His poems have appeared in the Bennington Review, BuzzFeed, Fence, Jubilat, The New Republic, The New York Times, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Time Magazine, and several volumes of best American poetry. He is the director of the Creative Writing Program and professor at Emory University. We are always, always, always grateful to have Jericho in the number. He is one of our favorite folks and an incredible interviewer, in addition to being an incredible poet. The woman of the hour is Tracy K. Smith. Tracy is a librettist, translator, and the author of 5 acclaimed poetry collections, including Life on Mars, which was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. We got 2 Pulitzer Prize. Her memoir, Ordinary Light, was a finalist for the National Book Award, 2 National Book Award winners. From 2017 to 2019, she served as the 22nd Poet Laureate of the United States. And she lives in Massachusetts now. But the book we're here tonight to celebrate is To Free the Captives. This book could not be more timely. And I'm gonna get out of the way and invite them to talk about it. But I think this question of how do we free the captives? How do we free the captive within us? How do we free the captives in America? How do we free the captives around the world? This question is ringing in my ears over and over and over again. And I think as we sit together and hold that sacred question, I know that we're gonna be filled with gratitude for having such wise and loving guides. So please put your hands together for Tracy K. Smith and Jericho Brown.
Hi. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm very excited. Tracy's an old friend of mine. And by old friend, I mean, I really want to talk about this book without telling you stories. But it's very difficult for me not to tell you a bunch of stories. And I notice even in this introduction, I said Tracy lives in Massachusetts. She lives in Massachusetts because she's an endowed professor at Harvard University. And she went there. She left. In order to go to Harvard, she left Princeton. So and it's really thank you so much for the notice about the Pulitzers. So I'll tell one story. When Tracy K. Smith won the Pulitzer Prize, I happened to be flying to New York where she was living that day by coincidence, by happenstance. I wasn't literary enough to know the Pulitzer would be announced that day, and I didn't even know to wonder if my friend would win it, you know. And when I landed, I turned on my phone. This is back when you couldn't even get, y'all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I turned on my phone. It became clear to me through social media. Hey, Nora. Hey, how y'all doing? It became clear to me through social media that Tracy had won the Pulitzer Prize, at which point I started screaming on the plane. And I called Tracy on the phone, and I said, Tracy, oh my God, you won the Pulitzer Prize. And Tracy's very calm and collected. She said, oh yes, I know. And I started crying. And Tracy's so sweet. It was a wonderful moment for me. Tracy said, oh, Jericho, just come over. If you're here, you could just, so I didn't even go to my hotel. I went straight to your house, and Linda Susan Jackson was there, and Raph was there, and we had champagne. I remember that very distinctly because I don't drink champagne, but I did that day. And but what that moment taught me was what it really felt like. What you knew that someone. I knew that Tracy was my friend because when she won the Pulitzer Prize, I felt like I had won the Pulitzer Prize. And one way that you know that you are connected to someone in a way that is, soul-oriented has to do with the fact of your happiness being made available by way of their happiness. Do y'all know what I mean? And I love, Tracy knows this, I love Tracy's writing. I love your writing. I love her poems. So I believe in her, and I believe she deserved a Pulitzer Prize. So later when I won the Pulitzer Prize, I felt doubly good because I was like, I'm sure Tracy feels like she won the Pulitzer again. Anyway, so yeah, that's my story. And I'll just keep it to that story. I won't tell any more. We have to talk about this beautiful book. Does everybody have this already? Yeah? Make sure you have one before you leave. Make sure you get another one. Because it's going, Christmas is coming. And you're right now wondering what to get for people. And maybe you haven't read this book. Who's read it already? Oh, good, just me. Yeah, so I can help you. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help. You want to buy as many copies of this book as possible because this is the perfect Christmas gift. When I got it, I kept thinking, it's the kind of thing I would love for somebody to give to me. Do y'all know what I mean? So it really is a gift. It's really beautiful. The way, if it's okay with you, Tracy, I was going to ask you to read a few passages. And as I ask Tracy to read some things, I'll also ask her some questions as we go. And because I love her writing so much, sometimes you'll hear things and maybe I won't ask a question I just wanted you to hear. And sometimes the passages will be longer than what they have been when I've done these kinds of conversations in the past, just because I want you to hear the longer passage. Is that okay? Are y'all good with that? All right, let's get started then. And welcome to Atlanta, Tracy K. Smith. Thank you to everybody from Caris, to everybody from First Baptist, and to everybody from the Georgia Center of the Book. Thank y'all so much for all the work that you've done to make this happen. Thank you. I was hoping that you could start with reading page 28 to 35. And then I think that's a good way for us to start this conversation about this book, if you're willing.
Absolutely. I like it. It really does feel like we're in church. Open the hymnals to 28. Good memories.
Maybe just start where it says the name of another neighbor.
The name of another neighbor, Simon Trixie Sr., jogs my memory. A letter he sent to Alabama Governor Benjamin Miller lives in digital form in the Alabama Department of Archives and History. It is handwritten in pencil by Trixie, who would have been 31 or so at the time, younger than my grandfather by almost a decade. By now, the stationery, a lined memo pad, has yellowed, but the voice penciled onto the page feels ever urgent. It tells a story the census withholds, isn't designed to tell, or simply has no way of knowing about life in Sunflower, Alabama during the Depression. Sunflower, July 7th, 1933, Governor B.M. Miller. Honorable Sir, I am writing you concerning my Reconstruction Finance Corporation job. It is so many meddlers here. Very near all of the colored folks have been cut off, some who hasn't got bread, and at the price now will not be able to get it and have large families. I was cut off this week. I didn't know anything about it until I was told today. I do think that since I'm of age, the folks should have asked me of my condition without taking someone else's word. I have a family of 5, am aged, and blind mother to help care for. She is in her late 70s. My wife has a very aged cousin of whom we have to help care for, since she hasn't any husband or children or any close relatives to depend on. We only get $1 per day, and groceries are unreasonably high, 35 cents per pack for meal, flour 65 cents for 12 pounds, meat 15 cents per pound for common kind of dry salt. It hasn't been a man on the job that worked any better than I. Either has it been a time that I've been late going on the job. I feel like I haven't been treated just fair and have such responsibilities on myself and several others with large families. It's only a few colored people on the job now. Now, if I have said anything to cause any offense, I humbly ask for a pardon. Kindly let me hear from you soon regarding this matter. Since I need some help or a job, will work any place. I owe a store account now. Humbly yours, Simon Trixie Sr., colored, Sunflower, Alabama. In his pressing appeal, Trixie is identifying an abrupt shift and circumstance. He's also bearing courageous witness to the feeling, no, the certainty of having been dealt an injustice. The economy is in collapse. Everyone is feeling it, but he feels singled out, laid off from a job he's good at and with no warning. And it's not just him. Very near all of the colored folks are in the same boat. In a time and place where Jim Crow laws mandate blacks' deference to whites, Trixie dares sign his name to a letter that is essentially a grievance. What if it is no accident that blacks, especially in the South, are being pushed to what we might think of as the front lines of the struggle? A place with no cushion and few to turn to for explanations. A place where they themselves become the cushion, the buffer, keeping whites in the same general communities from losing even more than they've already lost, which is more than they or anyone else can afford to. As much as Trixie's letter is a plea for his job to be reinstated, it is also a petition to be treated fairly. He seeks to be understood. Is that the problem? That state authorities do not understand what his community is up against? Just in case, he lays out the terms of his and others' circumstance and requests the courtesy of a straightforward explanation. Kindly let me hear from you. The reply from the governor's office, dated July 25th, reads, Dear Sir, Governor Miller has referred to me for attention and reply your letter with reference to Reconstruction Finance Corporation job. The amount allowed to Alabama by the Reconstruction Finance Corporation has been reduced. We are working now to get more funds. You should talk over with the people in charge of the matter in your county your situation, and I am sure they will give careful consideration to it. Yours very truly, John H. Peach, legal advisor to the governor. The two concrete facts that Peach consents to divulge are that funding has been cut and that he and his associates are working now to get more. But for whom? And by when? In comparison to the life force still palpable in Simon Trixie's letter, where I can discern the cadence of breathing, of a heartbeat, of hand gestures stirring up air, John H. Peach's reply reminds me of certain bots I have encountered. There is nothing kindly about it. How perfectly Peach manages to commit to nothing, not regret, not sympathy, not even hope. Trixie's letter is full of lives, meddlers, colored people, infirm relatives, hungry families. Peach, on the other hand, conjures up a vague body of people in charge of the matter. They have no names. There's no specific office where they can be found. How can they give careful consideration to something that will likely never make it to their desks? Do they have desks? Does Peach even believe, or does he simply imagine they exist? An institution, a government, an industry, a bank, a church, a university, is not a family. But like parents and loved ones, institutions purport to be invested in our care. As with kin, we are bound to them. They keep track of where we live. They know our needs, recall our setbacks. Some institutions make it possible for us to have and to hold, to buy and to sell. A great portion of every institution's rhetoric has to do with its investment in our success. And so it is logical or even intentional that our expectations of the institutions most closely touching our lives would have something in common with our expectations of the people we trust and love. Like my forebears, I also know what it means to allocate part of my earnings toward a mortgage and the support of a dependent family, to be indebted to faceless banks and institutions for whom my identity boils down to credit risk and little more. But compared with Trixie and my grandparents, even compared to my own parents, my current life is characterized by a moderate luxury. This is no accident. The foundation for my circumstances was laid by their diligence, their selfless providing, their ingenious resourcefulness, and their willingness to risk personal comfort and safety in petitioning for the collective dignity of their entire community. More than capital, these commitments were their greatest currency. The institutions that have touched my life most consistently from the time I was an 18-year-old leaving home until now are universities. At a university, the figures responsible for the management of affairs have smiling faces. They express pride in your work. They seek to assure you that with them, you are at home. When my peers and I came of age, the first among us to purchase houses or apartments did so with the help of family members. In my case, 2 of the 3 properties I've owned were purchased with the help of universities. In this one way, universities have operated for me in loco parentis, even into my own adulthood. To thrive at a university is to be held in a position of satisfaction and also indebtedness. To believe that your happiness is intertwined with your ability to do your best work, and though it is in your best interest to erect boundaries around the sanctity of your time, to harbor the inclination to say yes to what is asked of you. But the nature of an institutional bond is not unconditional. John H. Peach's limp, circuitous, abstract, half-hearted prose, can a thing be quarter-hearted, has been carefully crafted to say something while mostly saying nothing. Nothing is often enough a preferable alternative to saying simply no. Nothing is a holding pattern, a cloud passing before the sun. Nothing might, at first, cause the recipient to wait a moment, still believing some benevolent person in charge might, like a gust of wind, come forward and clear the obstacle. Okay. The archive offers no indication that the help Trixie sought ever arrived. Around this same time in the Depression, Wash Brown and Eugene Smith, who are my great uncle and grandfather, are sentenced to 60 days in jail for obtaining goods under false pretenses. For $25, their sentences can be reduced to 20 days. Are they? I can't tell. I can still hear Trixie in the background insisting, we only get $1 per day and groceries are unreasonably high, 35 cents per pack for meal, flour, 65 cents for 12 pounds.
Thank you so much. Can you also read 61 to 66?
Okay.
On 61, we could start, I have inherited.
Okay.
And then I'll ask you a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Really just one.
Okay. 61 to 60. You'll tell me when to stop. I have inherited several boxes of my father's files, military records, commendation medals, and certificates. Recently, I've come across a 1974 graduation program for the United States Air Force Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. The guest speaker on this day in 1974 was a general who started his career as an aviation cadet in 1942, the same year my uncles enlisted in the Army. Like my father and uncles and grandfather, he was born in Alabama, but their paths veer apart from there. After completing a combat tour in Europe, he became an instructor pilot and commander of numerous squadrons. The verb command appears 8 times in various forms in his bio. By 1974, he had been decorated with the Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal with 16 oak leaf clusters, the Purple Heart, and the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces Honor Medal, first class. He is so-and-so junior. Did his father serve in World War I, like Daddy Jean and Uncle Wash, whose draft cards are missing a triangular segment of the lower left-hand corner, the government's way of identifying recruits like them as black? If so, this man's father, so-and-so senior, his card would have remained intact. In an accordion file, I find a form letter dated October 17th, 1977, the day after a surprise 16th birthday party thrown for my brother, indicating that my father owes the military a debt of $1,030.63 for overshipment of household goods. The money, the letter announces, is to be remitted by a payroll deduction of $103.60 per month over the next 10 months. Even before I calculate that this proposed payroll deduction is equal to about $500 per month in today's economy, even before I pore over the columns of money in and money out each month, which leaves less than $100 worth of wiggle room for my family back then, I feel my father's panic. I know he feels accused, like he is being called a thief. And I know he feels indicted in another way, the way that says, if you were doing better, if you had chosen differently, if the circumstances had allowed for more, this letter wouldn't be a cause for alarm. I snap to my own still fresh memory of being blindsided by a titanic tax bill written in the same chilling governmentese, a syntax designed to tell you that no justification on your part, no private catastrophe, no emotional appeal, no anything will have bearing upon the government's determination to collect a debt you have allowed yourself to accrue. What does the Bible say? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. That letter made me feel like a fool for having failed to do either. A similar wave, part failure and part fright, crashes down upon my father on the sunny autumn day in 1977 when the letter arrives. Tucked into the same file, there is a handwritten draft of my father's reply and duplicate typed copies of the same. He writes, I am a career airman. This debt of $1,030.63 arose from the shipment of household goods from Hampton, Virginia to Fairfield, California in October 1975. The shipment was considered overweight for my grade. I was assigned to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia in 1972 after completing a Southeast Asia tour. Upon my arrival at Langley, no base housing was available, which required me to purchase a house on the local economy at Hampton, Virginia. In 1975, the 314th TAW, of which I was a member, deactivated, and I received a non-volunteer assignment to Travis Air Force Base in California. During the 3 years at Langley, I had accumulated the necessary furniture, appliances, and clothing to accommodate my family of 7. The assessed weight of my belongings outweighed the designated limit for my grade, which resulted in the indebtedness to the government. Upon my arrival at Travis, there was no base housing available due to renovation. This required me to purchase a house on the local economy at Fairfield. Although the equity received from the sale of my house in Hampton, Virginia did not constitute a loss, it was not adequate for a down payment on the house purchased here in Fairfield. Therefore, a loan was secured from the Travis Federal Credit Union to accommodate that requirement. I now have 5 children in school, of whom 2 are attending college. The attached Air Force Form 2451 comprises a summary of my financial status. To be burdened with this additional responsibility would impose a grave hardship which I am financially incapable of enduring. Therefore, I respectfully request remission and cancellation of this indebtedness. We did not have a piano. We did not have a pool table. We did not have a boat. We had a kitchen table and chairs and a dining room set. We had books. We had a sofa and upholstered chairs. We had some games. We had beds for the 7 of us. We had dressers and chests of drawers. We had my mother's old college trunk full of her quilts. We had some saws and tool chests, because the desk in my brother's room and the coffee table in the family room and the bookshelves in the downstairs hall were things our father built with his own hands. We had everyday dishes for everyday meals and my mother's wedding china for holidays. Are these things we ought not to have needed as the family of a career airman? My father will never claim discrimination, but it is as if I can hear Simon Trixie's voice there beneath the words in my father's letter, doing what my father refuses to do, saying plainly and unapologetically, I feel like I haven't been treated just fair and have such responsibilities on myself and several others with large families. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, just this last paragraph.
Okay. Not long after this episode, my father will be promoted to Chief Master Sergeant, the highest rank in the Air Force for a non-commissioned officer. Had he entered the service through a military academy or after graduating from college, he would have been on the track to become a commissioned officer, in which case his ceiling of opportunity, let alone the weight allowance given him for moving his family from one posting to another, would have been higher. Would he have been a commander? Possibly. Would he have been challenged, questioned, put in his place, or else simply watched for signs of the traits blacks are rumored never to shake? It is hard for me to imagine this wouldn't at least sometimes have been the case. At the time of the move in question, 1975, he was a senior master sergeant with a weight allowance to match. Are we to take my father's rank and grade as probable for him as for all the others like him who joined the military as an alternative to middle-class lives kept, for whatever reason, just out of reach? Are we to take that as a cap on his lifelong aspirations? Put differently, is rank an official means of keeping a man like my father from a place like Sunflower in his place? Even if it is nothing but a benign classification like height or weight, a letter like the one my father received must have reminded him of the limits on what he could reasonably allow himself to hope for, let alone expect.
Thank you. Y'all clap for that. That's beautiful. Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk about what led to the archival research that much of this book is taking on. The book moves chronologically from, I think, your great-great-grandparents all the way to your very young sons. And it goes a long way in honoring your father's legacy, a very beautiful way in honoring your father's legacy. But how is it that you come to put literal letters like this in a book? Also, how much did you find out that you were surprised by, or that you maybe already imagined that these black people from the South in particular were going through, but how much of it were you surprised by? Were there things that you felt you wish you would have already known? And what difference would it have made if you had known them?
Well, it's funny. When my siblings and I sold the house that we grew up in California back in, I think, 2015 or 16, I was the one who inherited all of the photo albums and boxes of documents. I was the one who got my dad's military records and medals. And they kind of went into a big box in a closet in my house. I looked at some of the photos, but I didn't go through every single thing. And when my family and I moved up to Massachusetts, and I was deciding where to put things, that's when I opened these files and went through them. And this isn't the first time that my late father has, I think, nudged me and said, hey, come on, look over here, look over there. And so I was going through his archive, essentially, and learning about these chapters in his life that I had been unaware of, that we had all, my 4 siblings and I, had been, blind to, which wasn't an accident. I think I understand that my parents, in fact, when I sometimes would worry about things, my dad would say, my job is to take care of you guys, and your job is school. So let me do my job, and you do your job. And I thought about that a lot as I was going through and feeling a version of the panic and the worry, and maybe even layers of regret that I imagine my father was dealing with at that and other times in his life. And I feel like he was guiding me to understand a fuller sense of who he was and therefore who I am. At that same time, I was looking for signs of his family, his parents and grandparents on, ancestry websites and state historical archives. And I found that letter by Simon Trixie and was interested in it. And then later, I found the census records that identified him as a neighbor to my grandparents during that period in the 1930s. And it almost felt like a moving picture began to present itself before my eyes. It wasn't any longer just the desire to hold on to names and locations and dates, but I felt that those voices, those feelings, and those urgencies kind of started to pan out before my eyes, and I realized, these were young people. They were, younger than I am now, with big families, in a country in crisis in some ways, and dealing with personal crises and feeling the disconnect between the institutional commitment that one hopes for and the reality of the limits on that sense of care and obligation. It helped me to think about my own relationship to institutions and to think about what freedom might actually be in this country. And in this chapter about my dad, I articulate the notion that actually in this country, I believe we are quietly divided into 2 categories. We talk about freedom. Sometimes when some of us start talking about history, and the history in particular of enslavement, people will say, that's ancient history, that was centuries ago, you're free. This is the present. Let's stick with the present.
Do you want to read 39? I think what you're about to say is on page 39.
Yeah, do you want to hear me read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
39 to 41.
Okay.
This is very exciting for me.
I love that you know these page number
Yeah.
references. That is a good friend who
We're
knows
getting
the
into
page
deep
number
theory right now,
references.
y'all. I was reading this, and I was like, Tracy done got even smarter. Wow. How did it get smarter?
Okay.
Yeah,
You want me to start on 39?
Throughout the summer.
Okay. Throughout the summer of 2020, my brothers, my uncles, my sons, all were safe, and yet war raged. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, in the eyes of our country, were they not my brothers, my uncles, and sons? Was Breonna Taylor not my sisters and daughter? Was she not me? These names, these lives, extend from a lineage that has never not touched me. That is what their names remind me, and likewise what I am made to see in the record of how and by whom each of their distinct lives was stolen. The summer of 2020 affirmed this lineage constantly. It was mine. It would never not be mine. I watched, I grieved. In my grief, I chose to speak. I told white people, we might just as easily call them institutions, that they were guilty. I named what it was they must be willing to put right, to give back. My error, I now see, had been believing I was free, that freedom had long ago been won for me. My error was in exercising a freedom I did not, in reality, possess. For in reality, I am not free, but rather freed. a guest in the places, we might just as easily call them institutions, where freedom is professed. Hence the many cruel things a few people said. Hence the few true things left unsaid. All those words, all that silence, and how much and how little any of it managed to change. The freed, people like me, descend from histories of subjugation, violence, enslavement, forced migration, and other such acts committed in the names of men, women, and even little children whose freedom has long been accepted as an a priori condition. For the freed, people like me, nothing that is ours defies contestation. Nothing that is ours has not, at one time or another, been regarded, handled, pocketed, and tossed begrudgingly back by the people presumed to have always been free. As natural as it is made to seem, to be free, as the free have deemed themselves to be, is not a congenital condition, not a natural extension of innate capacity or earned worth. It is a willful act, a pact with erasure and forgetting. As such, it has long been an occasion for the planting of new flags and the mapping of fresh territory, occasions on which blood has been shed, as often it has, are converted swiftly into proof that the freedom of the free must never be contested. Do you want to keep going?
I have this question sort of about this dichotomy and how you arrive at it, and I think you were about to talk about how you arrive at that dichotomy, but I have another question because there's a lot coming up about universities in this section of the book. I don't know if they can tell that, and it seems that part of what happens here is that you tell what you call institutions or white people, hey, here's what's going on in 2020, and here's what you can do about it. But then there's a lot that you leave out. You don't say who got on your nerves. Can you talk about, in a book this personal, because you tell a whole hell of a lot of your very personal business, it seems to me, in order to make the book as beautiful as it is, but how do you choose what not to say? How do you choose what names not to name? Because I think this is a moment when that's happening.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the year 2020, and for many of us, it was a moment where we were jostled into the sense, not only are most of us in this country watching the same footage, and many being convicted by this trend, this tradition of violence against unarmed Black citizens, many being jostled into wanting to bring justice closer to reality. And so I was at a school where many people were moved to say, okay, we want to stand for justice, diversity, equality, and there are things we can do. And the first thing maybe we need to do is to start talking about what it feels like, not just in the world, but even in a place as protected and as privileged as an Ivy League university. And those conversations are ultimately conversations about power. They're conversations about the hierarchies that America is full of and that universities really rigidly sort of like abide by, and that put people, the most senior faculty, there's probably other layers of identity wrapped into that at the top, with power, with choice, with voices, and with the ability, maybe most emphatically, to say no to certain forms of change or disruption. And it puts students, let's think about the most vulnerable students are the minoritized students, first generation, students of color, students maybe from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And so this was a moment when people at the top of the hierarchy were being asked to listen to the people who occupied those lower rungs. And much of what was asked for felt reasonable. Can you listen to us? Can you be available for us to talk about what we're struggling with, even if it's not academic? Can you be open to changing the way that you design some of the classes? Can you bring in material that's not only relevant to the time when you were educated, but to the world as we're experiencing it now? Can you make space for us in decision-making places? What about a faculty that might look as diverse as the nation? Those felt like really great, exciting conversations, but there were many occasions where I would be in a room and realize the fear and outrage that people felt when they believed that their freedom was going to be taken away or diminished by the people who were seeking a little bit more, not even freedom, but leverage within a university, safety. And I found that to be really disheartening. I didn't want to name names because I didn't want to make this a book about inside politics at, Ivy League universities, because this was happening in every category. I was on certain boards that were thinking about how their own institutions could do versions of those same things. And so what it really felt like was a moment of reflection and convulsion, where change was really becoming urgently necessary and inevitable, and where some were willing and many were adamantly opposed. That felt like the narrative as opposed to the soap opera version of it, And so I like the idea that maybe thinking about what our relationships to institutions are, and roughly they're similar regardless of what the institution is. That felt like a model that maybe anyone could find footing within. And it's the notion of realizing that, insistence upon those hierarchies and thinking about the fallacy that the most free have to protect and defend their freedom against the least free. That felt more important than, some of the, very interesting stories of conflict that many of us could tell from specific places that we've occupied. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Can you read, there's one paragraph on page 88. I just want you to read that one paragraph. It starts, I teach myself.
I teach myself to meditate in the summer of 2020 because I am worried, bothered, hurting. The world, the people in it, seem to be feeling these things too. All of us, no matter who we are or what we revere, are wounded. Even the people I see as guilty of one thing or another, guilty of harm against the people I love and prize, guilty of harm against me, even they are hurting too. It is the national condition. How long will the violence, which is the symptom of this condition, persist? How long will we be robbed day after day, season after season, and no matter who we are, of the fullness of our lives?
So there's this beautiful thing that happens in this book where you start talking about your experience with meditation and how this experience leads to you quite literally being able to get guidance from your ancestors. In the opening of this book, you say, you go on after that moment to talk about different visions you have and different things you see and how that leads you. And then later, even at the very beginning of this book, my father doesn't speak so much as lean in close, offering to ease me of a burden. One whole year as I listened over and over again to Otis Redding preach and plead and get down on his knees with his voice, I felt my father's presence beside me, guiding me to the story of an entire generation striving gorgeously through setbacks lined up like bowling pins by a nation's innumerable hands. And then later in the book, you even go as far as suggesting that it's your father's idea that you have more children after your father is indeed gone.
Yeah.
Was that scary? My question is, how do you get used to that? Also, you're a former student of Lucille Clifton, and you've seen Lucille Clifton's papers. Did you think you were turning into Lucille Clifton, who also seemed to be a person capable of conversations with the ancestors? Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you? Were you afraid that you were losing your mind? And then maybe you could also talk about the process of getting it down on paper and seeing it in print. Was there some fear around that? Did you think people would think of you that you've lost your mind?
I was a student of Lucille Clifton, and she would sometimes tell us stories in the class about conversations she had with her deceased husband or her deceased mother. And that very year was the first year after I had lost my mother. And so I would sit in that classroom, and as somebody who was just grieving an absence and turning to memory to comfort me, I loved to hear stories of somebody who had an ongoing relationship. And I would just sometimes ask her, could you tell some more of those stories? And I wanted to believe that maybe one day I could earn the ability to have that kind of relationship. It kind of flew in the face of my mother's view of the afterlife as, somebody who was devout Christian, and she would always say, don't go looking for me. I'm going to be in heaven, and that's where I want to be. And so I didn't even know if I was allowed to kind of long for that kind of dialogue. But 2020 was really hard. It was hard publicly, and a lot of those interpersonal conflicts were difficult, but they were also so disappointing. I felt suddenly, and I think, many people got divorced, changed jobs, moved out of just having to realize, what is the life I'm in? What is the life I wish to be in? Who do I want to be building things with? And I was dealing with that, and it felt like a burdensome, I don't know, a version of my life was ending. And so I started meditating to find comfort. And I started to think, I don't just want to be silent and still. I want someone to come and talk to me, someone who loves me, somebody who understands the bigger picture. And if you want that, ask for it, because it was this miracle of presence and guidance. I know prayer can be like that, but I grew up thinking I was sending these things off and hoping they would be answered. This other intention became a form of perceptible dialogue through, what I describe as my mind's ear or my mind's eye, hearing or seeing things that were relevant to the questions or the turmoil that I was living with. And suddenly I felt reminded that we are part, yes, of a complicated, dense, turmoil-filled world, but we're also part of this miraculous order, the universe. And I actually really do believe that the people who have come before us, many of whose investments are things that we care about. So for my people, this notion of freedom and liberation and caring for one another, making opportunities more possible for subsequent generations, this is work they haven't just left behind. I believe they're actually working alongside us in other form, and part of it is through guidance, part of it is through consolation, but I think there's even more still. So this became a worldview that totally recalibrated my sense of what hope might look like, what hope might draw from, and what forms of logic could be useful to the conundrums of violence, of war, of greed, of, the limits of the human experiment, let's say. And so that was really so exhilarating and transformative to imagine that from one day to the next I could go from feeling like I don't know if I'm going to have a nervous breakdown to I feel clarity and energy, and I understand there's this channel of love that we are contained within that makes things feel possible. So I didn't feel crazy anymore. And I didn't feel like I was going to be judged. Maybe I didn't care. because I was thinking, this is useful. Everyone I know is suffering, and so much of what we grew up believing would save us, so much of the sense of accountability that we thought, oh, if I just tell someone what's happening, it will be made right, that evaporated. And so this other vocabulary for strategy, for capacity, felt pretty revolutionary. I was excited to write about it and also bear witness to the fact that a vocabulary of the soul, which I realized I'd always had, both in religious contexts, but also in cultural contexts. Black people are always talking about soul, soul food, soul music, the soul cry, and I don't think it's an accident. I think this term threads a needle on these dimensions of experience that have sustained us. Simon Trixie never got that job back. He ended up moving in with his daughter and her family, but I think that was a happy household. I think there was a sense that when the external world refuses to care, we can find more care for one another in the space of love. All of that felt really exciting, and I started to wish that our vocabulary of civic commitment, even maybe one day our vocabulary of institutional belonging, will actually be infiltrated with the vocabulary of love, of the soul, of a responsibility that extends beyond 9 to 5 hours, that extends beyond a single season or a single life, and that could be something that's intergenerational because it's that important.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Let's give Tracy K. Smith a hand. Thank you. So I believe we do have time for questions, if there are any questions about the material of this book, or maybe you already have some questions just because you're studying Tracy in your class or something like that. But if there are any questions, hey, Geraldine, if there are any questions, please ask them. You can ask any question you have at the microphone. But I know people, you need encouragement. You need encouragement. So maybe we can give them some encouragement. Can you read page 106? This excerpt that Tracy's about to read recounts an experience of being asked to write lyrics for an opera. And in order to write these lyrics, she has to visit a plantation here in Georgia. And while visiting, the plantation owned, how do I say this, Tracy? Owned by its original...
Yeah, it's described as, I think, the oldest plantation still held by members of the original family.
The original family. Can you read, maybe y'all, as Tracy reads, you'll think of a question, or maybe you don't have any, you just want me to talk all night. And you'll ask that question, but can you, I do want to hear this. Can
Okay,
you
just the 106? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get to China.
Oh.
106.
You're like, just, you want me to do the audio book tonight, basically. Okay, China's a little bit in there. Maybe I'll go.
Maybe you could start at
109, how's that?
Yeah, that should.
Okay. So I was traveling with some musicologists, members of the opera creative team, my collaborator, and a historian who was so generous. And
Before this moment, part of what, there's a moment that Tracy's about to read about, but before this moment, when you get back to your room in the plantation, there's somebody from the past there, and you want to complain to that person, this former slave who's now gone, and that person says to Tracy, "Girl, ain't you free?" It's a really beautiful moment in this book. But can you read from that 109 moment?
And that was just a figment of my imagination. That was like a willful
wanted
dialogue.
that one.
Yeah, that was not real, but it was like I need to have it out with somebody who's on my side in this version. The historian in our group asks us, so we're traveling in the Low Country and moving through oyster rivers, and he's telling us about the rice plantations that would have been painstakingly erected and some of his research. The historian in our group asks us to do a mental exercise. What must it have felt like to the enslaved to live in the shadows and the margins and the silences of white plantation life? How must it have felt to be forced to surrender authority over yourself, your children, the fate of your family? He tells us what we ought to know, that the countless rich facets of the lives of the enslaved are marked most often by silence in the historical record, that a true accounting of where we are and what has happened here is impossible if we accept such silence as fact. A white man from South Carolina, he relates a story of pushing back, of sitting in his office one day and asking black women dead now hundreds of years for permission to piece together their stories. He recounts the relief and the fright that met him when these women answered back that it was all right with them if he went ahead and tried to tell their stories. Then he directs our attention to the landscape. It has been here this whole time, inviting our comment, the placid, glassy water, muscled, moss-slung trees, marsh grass asway in any breeze. This is the South's topography. But as with history, it is possible to see and not to see at the same time. These channels and banks, the labyrinth of waterways broken up by strips of land and vegetation, they aren't happenstance, but rather the remnants of rice fields, back-breakingly engineered in the heat of the Georgia swamp, by men dragged in chains from their homes in West Africa, men captured precisely because of their expertise vis-a-vis how rice is cultivated. At this, our vessel's captain, a reedy, bearded man in his 30s, is surprised. I didn't think we used them for rice. I thought we used the Chinese. And for an instant, I behold history through his eyes, the capacious we which accommodates him, the legion of interchangeable thems, each attached to a unique utility. Later, from the safety of my own privacy, I will take aim at his certainty with the weapon of laughter. It's all I can do to defuse what is otherwise grief. Who knows if I will succeed? What I dwell upon in the moment is that I can't quite pinpoint why this perception, I thought we used the Chinese, is preferable to him. Has too much been made of the debt his nation owes my people? Is there more than enough, as he sees it, that will already never be repaid? Has he tallied up the conditions Chinese workers endured during the laying of the Transcontinental Railroad, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the history of yellowface in Hollywood? Is there room on that ledger for yet another debt?
Are there any questions? Did anybody have any questions? No? Yes? Yes. Hi.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I understand that need and the impulse toward claiming and centering joy in that time. And that was maybe in some ways one of the wonderful side effects of that, being kind of quarantined together. But I write a lot about parenthood and the complications of parenting children in this country, knowing what we know of history. My sons, I have twin sons and I have a daughter as well, but the boys were born 8 weeks premature during the summer when the George Zimmerman trial was happening. And so I would visit them in the neonatal intensive care unit for the first few weeks of their lives and see the trial in the waiting room.
In a black hospital.
In a black hospital in Brooklyn, and feel every version of high stakes. Like this is a country where the safety that I want to claim for them is something I know is fraught and is not guaranteed. And this is yet another of the traditions that I'm bringing children into. And then there's a dimension of the book where I talk about my decision to stop drinking, which had been a coping mechanism in some ways for the stress and the surrender of parenting, because what's called for is sobriety in a world where we are called to defend our loved ones against so many forms of attack, or even the violence of being ignored or having their lives sort of read for them through the wrong lens. And so I think about the decision to be fully present for that as something that I chose eventually as a parent to step into, as opposed to nursing my own vulnerability. What I mostly think about and where I get to in the book is something close to what, the joy that I think you describe. Wanting to say that I see my father in my sons. I know that he was reflecting maybe his mother or his grandfather or uncles in some facet of his bearing. And I want to claim that as presence and an ongoing sense of support and solidarity and guidance. And I want to insist that largeness equips me to not only revel in the fullness of family, but also be present for those difficult conversations where change is something that needs to be fought for. Or maybe even feeling the need to summon the presence of knowing elders, though gone, for those hard conversations that I have to have with my children as well. This is a book where I'm really trying to bring language to what I hope others will recognize, because I think we're living through a time that demands a lot of us. And where I'm also hoping to galvanize readers to remember that we're building something large together. Even those we feel ourselves to be fighting against on some level, and the image of water occurs and recurs in this book, because I feel like the large wave, whatever wave is coming for us, is coming for everyone. Mm-hmm. And there has to be a moment where we can decide that some of the imagined frameworks that have held us, this is the captivity that I'm talking about, no longer serve a justifiable purpose. And we have to think about what we must do and who we're willing to become to meet those waves, to imagine we're on the same shore, and we're not. The notion of being opponents is something that's been sold to us at a really steep cost. So I don't know how specific that answer is, but in thinking about it, my mind and my spirit go in many directions.
One of the wonderful things that I love about this book is a passage where you go through the trouble of trying to figure out if it's okay to talk to your daughter about all this stuff you imagine you need to get to her before all of media gets to her, because it seems every week there's a new person, a new black person, a new unarmed black person murdered by police. And you're like, well, I guess I need to have a talk with my daughter. And then you go through what that talk would be like. And I thought that was such a beautiful offering to have, and that there's not a lot of that in literature, period, though it is a part of our inner lives, you know. Were there any other questions? Yeah?
Is this working? Sorry. First of all, thank you. I was fascinated the way the book reveals this aspect and dimension of institutions, and what you're revealing about our need for certain connections or expectations. And you also wrote or co-composed an opera of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. And I'm fascinated by thoughts of how these institutions, and it's such a different set of dynamics of those power relationships, and yet you have threads. So I just wondered if you had some thoughts to share about that thread of power relations, our relationship to power and institutions, because sociology can't always help us, but artists often do. Thanks.
Thanks for asking about that. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there is a connection. Even the opera that's I was doing research for in this book is also about property. It's black land ownership in the South, and regions like the Sea Islands that have been historically black owned for generations, which are now turning over into resort communities. And eminent domain is being used to seize a lot of land, or development is doing that. I think in some ways all of this concern is all about what we believe we hold and what we're told we might trade it for, right? An institution might say this patchwork of family that you have, which is a kind of safety, isn't as rigorous as what an institution might be able to do to protect and maybe even allow your wealth to grow. And sometimes there's this temptation to move away from the intimate and human toward the large. And I guess I'm just exercising a vocabulary of doubt, and trying to build in language, and in a way that maybe only language can do, because it ignores the borders of time, and it ignores the borders of life and death in order to think about sites of wealth, emotional wealth or connection. And I wonder if these are the things that we really have to insist upon investing in, and if these are the things that we can use to remind ourselves that power isn't what we're often urged to believe that it is. It's not, privilege or comfort. It's not something that we can hoard at the expense of others. It's not something that we can leverage to ensure that there are people with less than us that we can look at and be reminded of our own worth, but something else, something old in a way. I've spent all my life in these institutions. I'm indebted to them in many ways, but I'm very skeptical of them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to maintain that realization that there are living principles and capacities and vocabularies and traditions that might be more enduring even than the oldest and most august institutions that we pass through. And at a time when it feels like so much is ending, that might be really a form of consolation, I guess.
Let's give Tracy K. Smith a hand. It's really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Now, that's right. Stand up. That's right. Give it up. Roo, 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 roo.
Thank you.
That's right. So Tracy's going to sign books, and if you buy one, she'll sign it. You just got to buy it for us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the book signing table. Thank you.
Thank you, Jericho.
Thank you all so much. We'll be right over here. Don't forget, Karis is outside with copies of the book, and Jericho's is out there as well if you pick those up.